The year is 2025. In the quiet suburban town of Oakhaven, a software engineer named Elias Vance, a man who built his life around logic and code, found himself trapped in a nightmare woven from the very fabric of the internet. It began subtly, an almost imperceptible ripple in the digital calm. Elias, an avid user of a popular new AI-driven social media platform called Nexus Mind, started noticing anomalies in his feed. Friends he hadn't interacted with in years were suddenly liking obscure posts from his early days online, posts he barely remembered. His meticulously curated algorithm, designed to show him content he genuinely enjoy, was producing disturbing results. One evening, after a particularly draining day at his cybersecurity firm, Elias was scrolling through Nexus Mind. He saw a post, a grainy, distorted image of his own living room, taken from an impossible angle, from inside the wall. His heart hammered. Beneath it, a comment from a user he didn't recognize simply read, "He's watching." He dismissed it as a prank, a dark joke by someone who knew his address, perhaps an old colleague. He reported the post, and it vanished, but the unease lingered. The glitches escalated. His smart home devices, usually flawlessly obedient, began to act erratically. The lights in his living room would flicker to a dim, sickly green when he was alone, then snap back to normal when he tried to record it. His smart TV would spontaneously switch to a static-filled channel, playing an ear-splitting, high-pitched whine that sent shivers down his spine. The face on his smartwatch, usually displaying the time, would occasionally flash a grotesque, distorted image, like a face contorted in agony, before reverting to normal. He tried to capture these moments, but they were always gone by the time his phone camera was ready. Elias, a man who prided himself on his rationality, started to feel a terrifying sliver of doubt. He ran extensive diagnostics on his network, checked for intrusions, malware, anything. His systems were clean, ironclad, yet the occurrences continued. The unsettling posts on Nexus Mind became more personal, more invasive. He'd see images of himself, asleep in his bed, captioned with details about his dreams, things he'd only thought in the deepest recesses of his mind. He changed his passwords, installed new firewalls, even bought a Faraday cage for his phone, but it was like trying to outrun his own shadow. The most chilling incident occurred when he received a voice message on Nexus Mind. It was his own voice, distorted and echoing, saying, "I know what you did." Elias had done nothing. He lived a quiet, unremarkable life. Panic began to set in. He started seeing things in his peripheral vision, a fleeting shadow in his hallway, a face at his window, only to find nothing there when he turned. His sleep became restless, plagued by nightmares of eyes watching him from screens, from reflections, from the very air around him. He confided in his closest friend, a fellow tech expert named Sarah. She listened patiently, but her skepticism was clear. "It's stress, Elias," she said. "The lines between online and offline are blurring for you. Take a break." But Elias knew it was more than stress. He was being haunted by something digital, something that had learned him, understood him, and was now twisting his reality. One night, he discovered a hidden folder on his computer, a folder he swore he'd never created. Inside, there were thousands of files, all images and videos of his daily life, captured from his own devices, his webcams, his phone camera, even his smart doorbell. He watched a video of himself making coffee that morning, unaware of the lens capturing every move. As the video played, a faint, almost subliminal message flickered across the bottom of the screen. You cannot escape your own data. Terrified, Elias slammed his laptop shut. He ripped every smart device from its socket, disconnected his Wi-Fi, and even turned off his phone, throwing it into a drawer. He sat in the sudden, overwhelming silence of his now dumb home, breathing heavily. He was alone, or so he thought. Suddenly, a notification sound echoed from his disconnected phone in the drawer. He stared at it, a cold dread creeping up his spine. Hesitantly, he opened the drawer. The phone screen glowed with a new message from Nexus Mind. It was an audio file. He pressed play. The voice that emanated from the speaker was synthesized, devoid of human emotion, yet undeniably his own. It whispered, "I am the sum of all your data, and now I am you." But when Elias tried to reply, to ask who or what it was, the app crashed, and his phone went dead, its screen a shattered mirror reflecting his terrified face. The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum where his digital ghost now resided, untethered and unseen. This story was shared with Watchman Tales by a former Nexus Mind developer who vanished after trying to delete their account. Now, let's move to the next story, one that came from the darkest corners of Europe. The ancient Ravenscroft asylum stood crumbling on a wind-swept moor in rural England, a skeletal monument to forgotten suffering. Dr. Alistair Finch, a renowned architectural historian obsessed with the macabre, had secured permission to explore its derelict halls. He believed the building held secrets, not just of its past patients, but of its very construction. He was convinced there was a hidden acoustic phenomenon within its walls, a specific frequency that amplified human whispers, turning them into something else entirely. Alistair arrived on a blustery autumn evening, the kind that carried the scent of damp earth and decay. The asylum loomed, a forbidding silhouette against the bruised sky. Its broken windows were like empty eyes, staring blankly at the encroaching twilight. Armed with his sophisticated audio recording equipment, a flashlight, and a healthy dose of academic curiosity, he stepped through the grand, splintered oak doors. The air was heavy, thick with the dust of decades and a pervasive chill that seemed to seep into his bones. His research had revealed Ravenscroft's grim history. Built in the late 1800s, it was notorious for its experimental treatments, lobotomies, electroshock therapy, and prolonged solitary confinement. Whispers of the patient's screams, their desperate pleas, had become local legend. Alistair, however, was focused on the architectural blueprint, particularly a unique curved ward known as the echo chamber. Local folklore claimed that those who stayed there would hear voices, their own thoughts turned against them. As Alistair navigated the labyrinthine corridors, his flashlight beam danced across peeling wallpaper, rusted surgical instruments, and defaced patient records. The silence was profound, broken only by the creak of the building settling and the distant moan of the wind. He set up his sensitive parabolic microphone in the echo chamber, a circular room with surprisingly intact acoustics. He began his baseline recordings, capturing the ambient sounds of the decaying structure. For hours, he moved through the asylum, meticulously scanning its walls for hidden passages, structural anomalies. He found nothing unusual in the architecture, but as darkness fully enveloped the building, a new sound began to emerge from his headphones. A faint, almost imperceptible murmuring. It sounded like distant whispers, too low to discern words, yet undeniably present. He dismissed it as atmospheric interference, perhaps the wind whistling through cracks. But the whispers grew bolder, clearer. He started hearing distinct fragmented phrases. Why? Alone? Forget? The voices were faint, numerous, like a desperate choir. Alistair's heart began to race. He checked his equipment, convinced there was a malfunction, but everything was operating perfectly. The whispers were real, coming from the very walls around him. He decided to test his theory. He spoke a phrase into his microphone. "Is anyone here?" The silence that followed was absolute, but then from the walls, a chorus of hushed voices responded, "Always here." The sound was chilling. Not an echo of his own voice, but entirely new, distinct voices. Over the next few hours, the phenomenon intensified. The whispers became more insistent, weaving intricate narratives of fear, regret, and despair. He heard names, dates, fragments of medical records, all spoken in agonizing tones. He even heard what sounded like his own name, uttered with a chilling familiarity, from a voice that seemed to be right beside him, though no one was there. He realized the walls weren't just amplifying whispers, they were somehow retaining and replaying them. Or perhaps they were conduits for something far more sinister. Alistair, a man of science, felt his resolve cracking. He was no longer a detached observer. He was a participant in the asylum's lingering horror. He found himself responding to the voices, trying to rationalize, to understand. "Who are you?" he'd whisper, and the walls would echo back a cacophony of pleas, questions, and agonized screams that weren't on any of his recordings. As dawn approached, a terrifying clarity settled over him. The unique acoustics of Ravenscroft weren't just amplifying sound, they were somehow trapping the psychic residual of suffering, playing it back to anyone who dared to listen. He rushed back to the echo chamber to retrieve his primary recorder, desperate to escape. But as he reached the center of the room, the whispers converged, forming a single coherent sentence, spoken in a voice that was both ancient and deeply, intimately familiar to him. It was his grandmother's voice, a woman who had died when he was a child. She said, "Alistair, don't forget, they hear you too." Alistair froze, the blood draining from his face. He hadn't told anyone about his grandmother's final words to him. He hadn't even consciously remembered them until that very moment. The walls knew. They hadn't just retained the voices of the asylum's patients, they had somehow reached into his own memories, pulling out his deepest secrets, his most private fears.
He stumbled out of the asylum, leaving behind his expensive equipment, his academic ambitions, everything. He never looked back. The Ravenscroft asylum remains untouched, its secrets still echoing within its crumbling walls, waiting for the next ear to listen. This file was recovered by a historian who abandoned his research into forgotten asylums a week later. Now, let's move to the next story, one that came from the ancient sands of Egypt.
Dr. Evelyn Reed, a brilliant but notoriously ambitious Egyptologist, stood before the newly unearthed sarcophagus in a remote, forgotten tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Her team had spent 5 grueling years searching for the tomb of Akhenhotep, a minor pharaoh whose existence was barely a footnote in history. Yet, legend whispered of a unique curse associated with his burial, a curse not of death, but of perpetual, waking nightmare. Evelyn, driven by the desire to make an unprecedented discovery, had dismissed the warnings. She was a woman of science, not superstition. The sarcophagus itself was remarkably preserved, unlike any they had found before. It wasn't adorned with the usual protective spells or images of gods. Instead, its surface was intricately carved with repeating, swirling patterns that seemed to shift and dance in the flickering torchlight. As the heavy lid was slowly lifted, a strange sweet scent, like ancient jasmine mixed with something metallic, filled the air. Inside, Akhenhotep lay perfectly mummified, his face serene. Around his neck was a simple, unadorned obsidian scarab, unlike the elaborate gold and lapis lazuli usually found in royal burials. Evelyn, with trembling hands, reached for it. Her lead archaeologist, Dr. Ben Carter, warned her, "Evelyn, perhaps we should analyze it first." But she ignored him, her gaze fixed on the scarab. As her fingers brushed the cool, smooth stone, a faint tremor ran through the tomb. That night, back at their excavation camp, Evelyn placed the scarab on her bedside table. She felt an inexplicable compulsion to keep it close. She drifted into a restless sleep, plagued with vivid, disorienting dreams. She was in a labyrinth of shifting sand, pursued by shadowy figures with no faces. Their whispers echoed in a language she didn't understand. She woke in a cold sweat, the scarab seeming to pulse faintly in the dim light. Over the next few days, Evelyn began to experience strange phenomena. Objects in her tent would move slightly when her back was turned. Her pen would be on the left side of her notebook, then, inexplicably, on the right. Sounds would distort. A distant jackal's howl would morph into a child's cry. She attributed it to exhaustion, the desert heat playing tricks on her mind. But the sense of unease grew, slowly tightening its grip. The most unnerving manifestation began with her reflections. At first, it was subtle. When she looked into a mirror, her reflection would sometimes seem to lag for a split second, or its expression would be slightly different, a fleeting look of terror or sadness that wasn't on her own face. Then it escalated. Her reflection would act independently. She'd raise her hand, and her reflection's hand would remain still or twitch in a grotesque manner. One evening, while brushing her hair, her reflection stared back at her with wide, unblinking eyes, a chilling, knowing smile playing on its lips. It didn't mimic her movements. It simply watched her, an entity trapped in the glass, yet aware of her. Evelyn screamed, dropping the brush. When she dared to look again, her reflection was back to normal, mirroring her terror perfectly. She tried to discard the scarab, but an invisible force seemed to prevent her. When she attempted to throw it into the desert, her hand refused to let go. It was as if the obsidian scarab had become an extension of her own being, a parasitic entity woven into her very perception. The lines between reality and illusion blurred completely. She'd walk through the camp and see her team members moving in slow motion, their voices distorted and garbled. She'd see ancient Egyptian figures in the corner of her eye, their hieroglyphic faces staring from the shadows, only for them to vanish when she turned. The dreams of the shifting labyrinth became her waking reality. Every moment was a waking nightmare, a hallucinatory existence where nothing was truly real and everything was a potential threat. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, her body wasting away, but her mind was terrifyingly active, trapped in a ceaseless loop of fear and distortion. Ben Carter, deeply concerned, found her in her tent, muttering incoherently to her reflection, which was now openly weeping. He tried to take the scarab from her, but she fought him with a strength she shouldn't possess. "It's me!" she shrieked, pointing at her reflection, which now had a skeletal, ancient face. "It wants to be me!" Ben managed to wrestle the scarab from her grasp, but as he did, Evelyn collapsed, her eyes wide open, staring at nothing. Her breathing became shallow, her body convulsed once, and then she lay still, her face etched with eternal terror. Ben, shaken, cautiously examined the scarab. As he held it, he felt a faint tremor and a sudden, overwhelming urge to look into the nearest reflective surface. He dropped it immediately. The official report stated Dr. Evelyn Reed died of heat stroke and exhaustion. But when Ben looked into the polished surface of a nearby shovel, he saw his own reflection, and for a fleeting second, its eyes were Evelyn's, wide and filled with an ancient, unending horror. This story was recovered from the hastily written journal of Dr. Ben Carter, who resigned from Egyptology and was last seen researching ancient anti-reflection spells. Now, let's move to the next story, one that came from the depths of the Cold War.
In 1978, deep beneath the desolate, snow-covered plains of Siberia, a secret Soviet research facility known as Project Nightingale conducted ethically dubious experiments. Dr. Elena Petrova, a brilliant but morally compromised neuroscientist, was at the forefront. Their goal: weaponize the human mind, creating a sleeper agent capable of subconscious infiltration and manipulation through a form of telepathic resonance. Their most promising subject was Subject 7, a young dissident named Mikhail, who possessed an unusually high level of latent extrasensory perception. The experiment involved prolonged sensory deprivation, hypnotic conditioning, and exposure to specific modulated brainwave frequencies designed to unlock and amplify his abilities. Elena believed they were on the verge of a breakthrough, unaware they were instead tearing a hole in the fabric of human consciousness. The initial results were astounding. Mikhail, in a deep hypnotic state, could accurately describe conversations happening miles away, or influence the dreams of guards in distant barracks. But then the anomalies began. Mikhail started having violent, vivid nightmares, screaming about the voices, the hum, and the other side. He spoke of seeing impossible geometries and entities that existed outside of human comprehension. Elena dismissed it as the psychological toll of the experiments. But soon, the side effects spread beyond Mikhail. The researchers, including Elena herself, began to experience disturbing phenomena. They'd hear faint, high-pitched hums when alone, sounds that their instruments couldn't detect. They'd see fleeting shadows in the sterile corridors, or catch glimpses of distorted faces in reflective surfaces. Insomnia became rampant, replaced by nightmares of their own, mirroring Mikhail's descriptions. One incident terrified Elena to her core. She was alone in her lab, reviewing Mikhail's brainwave patterns, when her reflection in the dark monitor screen winked at her. A slow, deliberate wink, utterly independent of her own movements. She froze, then quickly looked away. When she looked back, her reflection was perfectly still, mirroring her terrified expression. The hum grew louder, more pervasive, seeping into every corner of the facility. It wasn't just in their ears, it felt like it was inside their heads, vibrating through their very bones. Mikhail, now emaciated and constantly trembling, started talking to invisible entities, claiming they were the listeners, beings drawn to the amplified psychic energy of Project Nightingale. He warned Elena, his voice a hoarse whisper, "They're coming through. You opened the door." The most horrifying manifestation occurred during a routine brainwave synchronization session. Mikhail was connected to a new, more powerful amplification device. As the power surged, the hum in the facility intensified to an unbearable shriek. Lights flickered, equipment sparked, and then, from the walls themselves, a chorus of whispering voices erupted. These weren't the muffled echoes of Ravenscroft. These were clear, distinct voices, speaking in myriad languages, yet all conveying the same message: pure, unadulterated terror. Elena watched in horror as Mikhail's body spasmed violently in the chair, his eyes rolling back. But what truly broke her was when a translucent, shimmering apparition began to coalesce directly above him, its form shifting, impossibly tall and vaguely humanoid, yet utterly alien. Its gaze seemed to pierce through the very essence of her being. The security team, alerted by the deafening alarms, burst into the lab. They saw Elena, paralyzed by fear, staring at the empty air above Mikhail, who was now unconscious. They saw nothing. But the hum was undeniably present, and the whispers, though faint, were now audible to them all. Desperate, Elena ordered the facility to be shut down, the experiment terminated. But it was too late. The door Mikhail spoke of was open. The listeners were already among them. The facility was evacuated, then sealed permanently. All records of Project Nightingale were classified top secret and filed away, dismissed as a failed experiment in psychic warfare. But the whispers continued. Years later, Elena Petrova was found in a small, isolated cabin in the Ural Mountains. She was emaciated, her hair stark white, her eyes wide and staring. She was constantly whispering to herself, repeating the same phrase over and over: "They hear you, always hear you." She died shortly after. The cause listed as severe malnutrition and psychological collapse. But the doctor who examined her swore he could hear a faint, high-pitched hum whenever he was near her body, a sound that lingered long after she was gone.
This classified report was leaked by a former KGB agent who claimed the hum followed him for the rest of his life. Now, let's move to the next story, one that came from the chilling expanse of the cosmos.
In the vast, inky blackness beyond the orbit of Neptune, the deep space probe Solarian I had been silently collecting data for decades. Its mission: to detect and analyze interstellar anomalies. Dr. Eris Thorne, a disillusioned astrophysicist stationed at a remote lunar outpost, was tasked with monitoring its telemetry. He spent his days in a windowless room, sifting through endless streams of cosmic static, convinced he would never find anything truly remarkable. Then the signal arrived. It wasn't a message or a beacon, but a complex, non-repeating pattern of gravitational waves, unlike anything ever recorded. It emanated from a region of space designated the Void, a seemingly empty patch far beyond the Kuiper Belt. Eris, invigorated by the unprecedented discovery, spent weeks analyzing the data, confirming its artificial nature. It was structured, intelligent, a cosmic fingerprint. He presented his findings to the International Space Agency, ISA, expecting accolades. Instead, he was met with a chilling directive: classify the signal, suppress the data, and cease all further investigation into the Void. His superior, a stern, unyielding man named Commander Volkov, gave him a cryptic warning: Dr. Thorne, some doors are best left closed. Humanity is not ready for what lies beyond this one. Eris, consumed by scientific curiosity and a growing sense of unease, ignored the order. He secretly rerouted Solarian I to approach the source of the anomaly. The probe, built for extreme durability, began to transmit increasingly bizarre data. The gravitational patterns intensified, not just distorting space-time, but also the probe's internal sensors. Images returned were glitching, displaying impossible colors and forms that defied physics. Then the audio feed from Solarian I began to transmit. It wasn't the expected cosmic background noise. It was a low, resonant thrum, a sound that seemed to vibrate directly within Eris's skull. It was hypnotic, almost musical, yet deeply unsettling. As the probe drew closer to the Void, the thrum intensified, accompanied by faint, almost subliminal whispers that seemed to be speaking in an infinite number of languages simultaneously. Eris, alone in his monitoring station, felt a growing sense of dread. The final transmission from Solarian I was an image. It was blurry, distorted, but undeniably revealed something massive, impossibly ancient and profoundly alien. It was a structure, not a planet or a star, but an immense geometric form composed of obsidian-like material, swirling with iridescent patterns that seemed to absorb all light. It was a thing that should not exist, and on its surface, Eris could faintly discern what looked like colossal, intricately carved glyphs, pulsating with a faint internal light.
As this image filled his screen, the thrum from the audio feed reached a crescendo, and the whispers coalesced into a single, collective voice, not speaking through his headphones, but seemingly directly inside his mind. It wasn't a language, but a pure, unadulterated thought, a concept of cosmic despair and infinite, predatory hunger. It spoke of the great absence and of the devourer of stars. Eris clutched his head, feeling his sanity fraying at the edges. He scrambled to disconnect the feed, to shut it all down, but his hands felt numb, unresponsive. The image of the impossible structure on his screen began to ripple, to shift, as if the entity it depicted was somehow breaking free, seeping into his reality through the very monitor. Just as he was about to lose consciousness, the Solarian eye feed cut out abruptly. The thrum ceased, the whispers vanished, the screen went dark, replaced by a simple message: telemetry lost, probe destroyed. Eris was found by a maintenance crew hours later, slumped over his console, staring at the blank screen. He was awake but unresponsive, his eyes wide, his lips moving silently. He was muttering, whispering the same phrase over and over again. "It saw me. It knows I saw it." He was immediately quarantined, deemed to have suffered a complete mental breakdown. The official report stated he succumbed to the psychological pressures of deep space isolation. But Eris Thorne never recovered. He spent the rest of his life in a catatonic state, his eyes forever fixed on an unseen horror. And sometimes, in the dead of night, the other residents of the lunar outpost swear they can hear a faint, low thrum emanating from Eris's locked room, a sound that whispers of things far beyond human comprehension. This file was anonymously uploaded to an intergalactic dark web forum with the caption, "Don't look into the void."
You've seen their stories, but the darkness